Let's go to this conversation now as consumers brace themselves for another interest rate hike. The cost of living getting higher and people forced to make tough choices when they visit grocery stores. The average cost of a household food basket has increased by nearly 65 rand. The price of cooking oil, eggs, salt, among others, is going up. Let's look at this and more. We're joined now by Mervyn Abrahams, Pietermaritzburg and Economic Justice and Dignity Group Program Coordinator. Ms. Abrahams, thank you so much for your time this evening. Let's start with the provinces that you looked at when tracking the food prices.
So good evening, Bongiwe, and good evening to all your listeners. So we track food prices in all the major centres of South Africa, in the Johannesburg area and its surrounding, like in Vosloorus, Alexander, in Hillbrow. We also track in Durban. We look at KwaMashu, we look at Durban Central, we look at areas around the eThekwini district. Then, of course, also Pietermaritzburg, and of course also around Cape Town. And then in two very small towns to pick up what's happening in small town South Africa. And there we collect figures in Matuba, in KZN, and in Springbok in the Northern Cape. And as you've said, our basket, which consists of 44 very, very basic foods, constructed for a household of 7 persons, has increased by 64 rand and 25 cents over the last month, bringing the cost of that basket now to 4,917 rand. And this is the highest it's been since we have recorded this index in June of 2018.
And one can't even begin to think, because if this is a household of 7 people, the reality is that in some of these households, there's more than 7.
Exactly, and we know, Bongiwe, that the lower the income and the poorer the household, the larger are the group of people who eat from the same pot. So in poor communities, the affordability crisis has just escalated over the past year, and people just do not know what to do other than, we are told, cutting back on the amount of food they eat or the quality of food that they eat. And both of those two options are in fact quite bad for South Africa from a socio-economic point of view, because it impacts negatively on health, it impacts negatively on education, on economic productivity, and on our future economic growth.
Now, the average cost, of course, of, the food basket going up, as we are saying right now, and you say that it's the highest it's been since you started this particular index. Let's look at some of the foods that are, really, really basic and have gone up dramatically.
So when we look, for instance, Bongiwe, at the year-to-year figures, not month-to-month, but year-to-year, then we will see, for instance, a 30 kilogram of maize meal this time is 17% higher than it was a year ago. A 10 kg of cake flour is 28% higher. A 10 kg of sugar is 7% higher. SAMP is about 29%. A 5-liter cooking oil at the moment is 32% higher. Now, this has actually been coming down over the past year. Last year, it was year on year almost 75% higher. So that's good news in a sense. Potatoes have increased dramatically. It's about 30% higher, as did onions by about 75% higher than a year ago. We talk about chicken pieces, which is very staple for most South Africans. It's 7% higher, and bread is about 18% higher now than it was a year ago. And these are just some of the foods in the basket.
And I mean, listening to just, some of what you talk about there, it's everything you expect to find in, an average household. How tougher then will the choices be when it comes to making, to buying groceries, particularly when you're looking at the fact that right now we've just heard NESA coming out granting Eskom a tariff increase. At the same time, there's now talk of, a further interest rate hikes.
Exactly, Bongiwe, and we're looking potentially at petrol price increase as well. So we are seeing all these kind of increases. An 18% increase in electricity will take the average cost of prepaid electricity for a low-income household, which at the moment we are calculating at 787 Rand. It will take that to about something in the region of 934 Rand. So that would be 146 Rand increase. When we are talking about interest rates, then of course that has a massive impact even on lower income families, because what we know is that debt servicing is an important means for them, because money doesn't last till the end of the month, and midway they have to go and lend. And some people might say, well, but lower income and poor people are not directly impacted by interest rates hikes. And that's not really true, because even though they're not in the formal financial sector, increased interest rates ricochet back into the informal sector as well. So essentially South Africans are being knocked from all angles by these increases, and yet social grants and wages are not increasing. If I might just say something about wages. So for instance, the national minimum wage, the Department of Labor has proposed an 8% increase in the national minimum wage, which is higher than inflation. But when you look at the 18% electricity increase, that will effectively mean that that increase will be about 3.8% off that 8%. Which means that the actual increase would only be in the region of something like 4.2%, while CPI is tracking at well over 8%.
And I suppose that also, you know, when you look at the time of year that this is January. Parents have just paid money, you know, hefty amounts in some cases for their children to go back to school. This is also going to be yet another contributing factor towards the burden.
Exactly. And the month of January is especially difficult for parents, because, you know, it's school uniforms, it's stationery, it is food, extra food. It is just a very bad month. And now to have potentially interest rates, which could also translate into job losses, particularly for domestic workers, and fuel price increases, as well as electricity increases. Really, what we are saying as the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group is that there needs to be a dedicated department within the presidency, a unit within the presidency, that looks at all these different increases that are hitting the consumer in terms of its impact. So, for instance, NERSA gives Eskom 18%. And they just make it. Then the Reserve Bank comes out and hikes interest rates by 50 basis points. And then the municipalities increase rates and tax and water by, you know, whatever percent. And then the fuel price go up. There is no coordinated monitoring of all these increases as it impacts on South African households. And that is actually a critical area for us going forward.
Yeah, and the monitoring very critical, especially when you look at, you know, the pressure that is now being put on consumers. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Abrahams. Do appreciate it. That is Mervyn Abrahams, Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group Program Coordinator.